Thank you so much. We will have time for questions and discussion after the second presentation, which is about decarbonization pathways in the energy sector by Sandrine Mathy, CNRS.
Good morning, and I just want first to thank Rémy for the invitation, and I was very pleased to hear all of you yesterday and also today, and it's really important for all these disciplines to meet and to have some exchange. So I am Sandrine Mathy. I am an environmental economist. I work at the GAEL, which is the Grenoble Applied Economics Lab, and I will present you some issues related to energy decarbonization pathways in the context of the Paris Agreement towards the renewal of the economics of climate policies. I will first present you some issues related to carbon neutrality as a new energy horizon, and I will also talk about two issues that may renew the economics of climate policies, which are energy sufficiency and climate policy co-benefits. So, first of all, even though there are some elements that you already have in mind and that we already talked about, I would like to begin this presentation with a few elements of framing. So, the objective of the Paris Agreement is to limit global warming to below 2 degrees and as close as possible to 1.5 degrees. And the corresponding trajectories for the century related to greenhouse gases emissions on the left and to CO2 emissions on the right are presented here. So in red and orange, it's emission trajectories that would be reached with the implemented policies and 2030 pledges that were submitted by countries in the framework of international negotiations. And in blue, you have two 1.5 degree scenarios, and in purple, 2 degree scenarios, sorry. And so you can see that these two pathways approach to zero in the next decade and even drop under zero emission in 2050 for 1.5 scenarios and in 2070 for 2 degree scenarios. This means that we will rely on what we call negative emission and negative emission technologies to reach these objectives. What are these carbon neutrality we're talking about, and how can we really implement this? Actually, we have two contrasted emission pathways that are possible. The first one on the left, you can see that it induces very strong emission reduction on the very short term, but a limited, we would need to rely not so much on negative emission. And it would only be forest management, planting trees that could create negative emissions. But the risk is on the accelerated transformation of the energy system. On the right, on the contrary, you have more room of maneuver on the short term, and you can delay a very strong emission reduction. But the consequence is that you will need to rely really heavily and massively on negative emissions. And how could we maybe reach such negative emission? We would need to develop a technology that is not available for the moment and that would require really strong innovation on the very short term, which is called BECCS. And it's the fact that you produce electricity with biomass. You capture the CO2 that is emitted and you put it on the underground. It's the bioenergy with carbon capture and storage. This technology does not exist for the moment and would present many risks for the ecosystem and also some risk of leakage of the gas that is stored on the ground. And the other consequences is that there will be many risks of competition on land use with effect on agricultural system, biodiversity, and ecosystem. So myself, I prefer the left one. I think it's more resilient. So what would it mean? On the very short term, it just would mean to divide by 2 emission from their current trend in 2030, which means in 8 years. But national determined contribution would only lead to maybe a drop of a few percent in 2030. So there is a huge gap. How can we limit this gap? So after all this very, very, very bad news, there is one good news. And the good news is that renewable energies are now competitive with fossil fuels. This is a graph that I took in the last IPCC report, and you can see the tremendous drop in the energy cost of photovoltaics and for electric batteries. You cannot see it, unfortunately, but there is a gray rectangle on the bottom of each of these graphs, which shows a range of production cost of fossil fuels. And actually, photovoltaic and wind, offshore or onshore, are now in the range of production cost of fossil fuels, which means that they are now competitive. So this is a very good news, but it may be not enough to divide by 2 the level of emission in 8 years. Nevertheless, there are many options that are other options that are available. This is also that I took from the last IPCC report, and it presents the mitigation options and their estimated range of cost and potential in gigatons of CO2 per year. And the mitigation cost is calculated by dividing the investment cost and operating cost over the lifetime of the project, and all this is divided by the amount of CO2 emissions that would be reduced over the lifetime of the project. Okay, so in blue, it's what we call no regret potentials, because it's options that are less costly than what is developed currently. And so we find, again, wind and solar there, with very high potential of mitigation. This is the biggest potential of mitigation among all the options. And we find also other potential of mitigation, which are avoid demand for energy services, efficient lighting, appliance equipment, fuel-efficient light-duty vehicles, shift to public transport and to bike and e-bikes. And so these options relate to energy efficiency and to energy sufficiency. I will tell you more about that. There are other options that are more costly, and these options refer to producing electricity with biomass, capture, storage, and sequestration, also some operation for the isolation of new buildings, etc. Nevertheless, we can see that there are many available potentials that are available at low cost. But I think that there are 2 issues that are not enough investigated in our discipline. It relates to the role of energy sufficiency in greenhouse emission reductions and climate policy co-benefits as a lever for the adoption of ambitious climate policies. So first one, energy sufficiency. What is it? It is different from energy efficiency. And I will give you this definition from Wolfgang Sachs in 1999. While efficiency is about doing things right, sufficiency is about doing the right things. And I gave you some few examples of how it can apply in different sectors. In passenger transport, you can reduce the number of kilometers with cars and airplanes. You can do modal shift toward active modes, use smaller cars. In the residential, you can reduce the room temperature in winter, etc., etc. In food, you can reduce the meat consumption. For a long time, energy sufficiency was considered as a threat to economic growth, to quality of life, to well-being. And actually, the issue was not really taken seriously. And for example, I counted the number of occurrences of the term energy sufficiency in different IPCC reports. And it's only the last one that we begin to talk about this. It's only 191 times the term is used in a report that is among 2,000 pages. Before, we didn't talk about that. There is one interesting article that tries to evaluate the level of the good level of energy consumption. And Burke makes the assumption that there is an energy sufficiency saturation curve, which means that there is a level which is the highest level of well-being attainable as related to energy, Y2. And if you are above this level, you are in energy overconsumption. On the contrary, there is another level, which is the lowest acceptable level of well-being as related to energy. And if you have below this level, you are in a situation of energy poverty. And he tried to estimate what is the range, the good range that we need to have a good quality of life. So he gathered many data in many countries and related to energy consumption and to well-being. And actually, he managed to estimate this green line that you can see on the right, which refers to this highest level of well-being attainable as related to energy. And he compared this level with the level of energy consumption in other countries. And as you can see, OECD, without surprise, our OECD countries are above this level of energy. And for example, United States and Canada are more than twice above this level, which means that there is a huge potential of energy consumption reduction and of emission reduction that we could try to grasp. How can we do that? There's not a magic solution. It will be a combination of maybe political imposed bans or limits, like a low emission zone in cities, modification of relative prices, so we will need something like a carbon price, and we will have to work very seriously on the modification on individual preferences, on the evolution also of social norms. The second issue I wanted to talk about is about the co-benefits of climate policies. And there is a link between energy sufficiency and co-benefits. When you implement a climate policy, you can develop renewable energy supply. And when you develop renewable energy supply, you decrease extraction of fossil fuel, you improve energy security, you decrease energy poverty, etc. You increase well-being. You will also decrease the level of emission of pollution of water, you will have benefits on health, and you will also improve biodiversity. You can also implement energy saving and efficiency, and then you can have some impacts on agriculture, on productivity, on employment, and on growth. And you can also develop greenhouse gas sinks with the development of forest and forest management. You will protect biodiversity, you will have benefits for indigenous people, and you will improve landscape. So this is a list of and the interconnection between many co-benefits of climate policies. There are two issues that have been more investigated in the literature, in the economic literature, which refers to the impact of air pollution diminution and the impact on agriculture. And when you consider only these two co-benefits, the result is that the co-benefits of climate policies exceed the cost of decarbonization. This is a paper that was published in 2019 in Nature Communications, and which shows that air quality co-benefits for human health and agriculture cost exceed the cost of decarbonization. On the left, you have the impact on avoided death, and you can see that if you implement a 2 degrees scenario, you can save 1 million lives in 2050. Most of them would be saved in India and China. And the economic analysis shows that they compare mitigation costs with the climate co-benefits, And you can see on the right that the 2-degree scenario, the colored circle are the co-benefits, and the gray rectangles are the mitigation cost, and all the circles nearly are above the rectangles. And at the world level, and more particularly for India, China, but also for Europe and United States. Another example that I wanted to show you and to talk about is the fact that maybe for local authorities, it would be interested to have another point of entry different from climate policy, but to go in climate policy by pollution control policies. Why? Because pollution have impact on the local population on the short term, and if you implement pollution control policies, you will have impact on the short term, which is different from climate policies whose benefits are on the longer term and at the global level. So with Rémy, we coordinated a project which is called MobilAir, and we that was applied to the Grenoble urban area. And considering that each year you have 145 people who die prematurely due to fine particle pollution, we considered the objective to divide by 3 this health impact of pollution. And we, with a chain of modelization, we tried to identify sectoral measures that could be implemented at the local level that could lead to this objective of reduction of mortality. And so we would need to replace all inefficient wood heating with pellet stove, and also to implement a low emission zone that would need to decrease mobility, car mobility by 36%. And so to have this reduction in the place of cars in the city, you need to develop active mobility and to develop bicycles, e-bikes, and walking. And so we made some scenarios of modal shift, and we made the evaluation, the health impact evaluation and the economic evaluation. And actually, you can see here that the health impacts are, there is a double dividend because beyond the health impact of pollution diminution, there is another benefit which is linked to active mobility and physical activity that is related. The economic analysis, so we implemented a cost-benefits analysis, and we took into account the cost of the policy, infrastructure, to implement the sectoral measure. We took into account the impact on household expenditure, and we took into account all the externalities, climate change, health benefits related to noise, related to pollution, related to physical activity. We took into account the value of time and road safety. And the result is that the sectoral program, will lead to a net benefits of 600 euros per capita and per year for 20 years. So we think that this kind of analysis could be very interesting for local authorities in order that they get on the train of climate and pollution control policies. Last example, it's related to energy poverty. 2 slides. Energy inefficiency in housing is responsible for 30% of excess mortality in France. You have some different health events related to this energy inefficiency. And the likelihood of a health event that would occur within 12 months is on average 1 out of 18 in energy inefficient housing, But this likelihood is different according to the level of income. Actually, for people that are below the poverty threshold, this likelihood is 1 out of 4. And for people who are in decile between 4 and 10, it's only 1 out of 320. Each inefficient dwelling costs on average 7,500 euros per year, which are divided between medical costs, loss of well-being, and mortality social costs. And when you take this into account for the estimation, the cost estimation of a program of thermal renovation of less efficient dwellings, if you renovate 1.3 million energy inefficient dwelling, which is the less efficient in France, you would prevent 2,200 deaths each year, and it would represent an annual gain of almost 10 billion euros per year. So I think that this kind of evaluation completely changed the approach of the net mitigation cost that doesn't take into account co-benefits. To conclude, just would like to wrap up some elements. So climate policy should not be seen as a burden, but as an opportunity to address a range of social, environmental, and economic priorities. Energy sufficiency offers a great mitigation potential without decreasing well-being, and may even produce important co-benefits. Overall co-benefits of climate policy exceed the mitigation costs. There are co-benefits for the population as a whole, pollution reduction, the impact on health, but also private co-benefits that are related to behavioral changes, such as active mobility, dietary changes. And this can be a lever for behavioral changes to give incentive for people to change. Many co-benefits are tangible in the short term and local, unlike the benefits of climate policies. And so they are a lever for the adoption of climate policies by local authorities. And co-benefits of climate policies will increase individual willingness to pay for climate policies, and they may also reduce inequalities. Thank you.